Hi, I'm Tom Kehr, systems designer and trainer here at Exertis Almo, and with me today are Pat and Brenda Brown of Synergetic Audio Concepts. I'd like to start out by pointing out that our industry has always had an identity crisis. No one seems to be able to define audiovisual. Somehow I've managed to live with this. But here's something I have never figured out, and I've been in this industry nearly 4 decades. You meet an audio person and you mention Don and Carolyn Davis, or Pat and Brenda Brown, or SynodCon, or refer to the book Sound System Engineering, and they respond with a blank look. Back when I lived in Washington, D.C., the Washington Post newspaper had an advertising slogan many years ago that said, "If you don't get it, you don't get it." I would say the same is true of SynodCon. If you've never attended a SynodCon class or workshop, or taken a SynodCon course, I would say you don't get it. In fact, I was hired as an audiovisual engineer at one firm because I had a SynodCon course on my resume. They instantly recognized that when it came to audio, there was a high probability that I got it. Synergetic Audio Concepts, or SynodCon, or even SAC for short, started by Don and Carolyn Davis back in 1973. Don worked at Altec Lansing from 1959 through the early 70s, was one of the pioneers of equalization, among many other things. Don and Carolyn wrote the original Sound System Engineering, known in the industry as the Yellow Book. It's now in its 4th edition, with Don, Eugene Petronas, and Pat as the authors. Pat and Brenda came onto the SynodCon scene in 1995, and I attended my first SynodCon 5-day course in Arlington, Texas in 1997. I'll state at the outset that I'm biased. I have found the SynodCon classes to be the absolute best audio training in the industry, and I teach AV for a living. I've often joked that when I grow up one day, I want to be like Pat. When somebody asks me about a list of training resources in the industry, SynodCon is always at the top of the list. So I want to do a little background on both of you. Pat, you earned your electronic engineering technology degree in 1978. You've been a musician, sound technician, retail music store owner, a contractor, and a consultant. You've been around. You've kind of done it all. And Brenda, you were raised in the fields of a produce farm, had a successful nursing career. I will say that anyone that grew up working on a farm already has a pretty good resume. So Pat, in 1995, you became an associate SynodCon instructor to Don Davis. Don liked to teach the theoretical, and he wanted a contractor or consultant to come in and teach the practical. What was it that led you into teaching in the industry full time?
Well, I, like a lot of people in audio, I sort of have backed in to this situation. I never started out to do audio or teach audio. I started out as a guitar player and realized at a young age that lead guitar probably wasn't a great career choice for me. So started looking for things to do that kept me engaged with the gear and the music and what have you. So I started doing the technical side of things. And I bought a PA because I figured if I had the PA, the band couldn't fire me, even if they found a better guitar player. So I had, sort of a technical leaning on the PA side, and I always wanted to know how stuff worked. So I would, experiment. I blew up a lot of stuff and, just got under the hood on things and eventually just started seeking some formal education because I thought, this is all technical stuff and I've got some engineering background. There should be a rhyme and reason to all of this. And that's when I found Don's original Yellow Book at the local electronics bookstore, when there was such a thing. That had to be around 1980, maybe, a little earlier.
I forget when it was originally published, but yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. And, and I thumbed through that book, because just a little further back, I was doing some sound system installs and I had just royally screwed up a job in a Methodist church that was reverberant. And I put in a beautiful system. It looked great, but you could not understand the language that was being spoken over the system. It was a reverberant octagonal room for a pipe organ. And I thought, this should have been predictable. How did I do this? So I went looking for an answer and I found this book, Sound System Engineering. And I thumbed through it. And it's like, what's all this math? I've been doing all of this without any consideration of math. And so I read the book, understood very little of it, read it again, understood a little more, kept going through that iteration. You learn how to learn when you get started in this. And finally realized that I had made about every mistake that I could have made on that system. And it was completely predictable as to why the intelligibility was poor. And I vowed at that time, one, to learn all the stuff in that book, and two, to never make that mistake again. And that was like 1980. And it wasn't until another 6-7 years that I actually got to a SynodCon class and got to meet the author, Don Davis, and Carolyn, his wife, and moved on from there.
Yeah, it was interesting. Kind of the predecessor to that was Howard Tremaine's Audio Cyclopedia, published 1959. That really is an encyclopedia. It wasn't until Sound System Engineering I considered that a how-to.
Yeah.
And your experience with, well, at least my experience with second edition was very similar. I hardly understood anything first time through, but I had to keep going through it. And it's like, oh, wow, this all makes sense. And I've hammered this point with designers. Every aspect of an audio visual system is predictable ahead of time so that there's a known outcome. You've got to apply some math. It's not that hard, but all aspects of the system are predictable at the outset. So
well, and it requires repetition. Until you've done something 100 times, you don't really have a feel for it yet. Right. And that's one thing I learned early on is you have to just keep doing it until you get comfortable with it.
I would not want to show you some of my first solder work.
Yeah,
same thing.
Yeah.
And Brenda, I don't want to minimize your industry experience just because Pat is kind of the talking head. In a 2011 interview, Don Davis said, Brenda is very sharp, very on top of things, understands the technical part in addition to her business talents. That's quite high praise from an industry icon such as Don. And obviously, Don and Carolyn did SynodCon together and set the example for SynodCon being led by a couple. Pat, you had your own thing going, and Brenda, you also had a successful career. It would seem that life was just going along just fine. What made you change everything that you were doing and do SynodCon full time?
Well, I think we just looked at the future, and I was contracting at the time and climbing scaffolding and, crawling around in attics and under buildings. And I thought, this is fine right now, but I don't think I can grow old with this. And so SynodCon looked like it had more of a future. And Brenda, how about you with the nursing?
Well, it was a little hard for me to give up nursing, but at the same time, I saw Pat's passion for this. I knew he could teach because I saw him teach, and he taught well. And so I just kind of knew within my heart of hearts that he could do it, and he did it. So I wanted to support him.
Yeah, and you both of you work amazingly well as a team. Pat, you're up front doing all the stuff, and Brenda does all the hospitality part of it. And if anybody's
Brenda does a lot more than that. There is so much behind the scenes to make a company run. I get to do the fun part and play with the toys, and basically she does everything else. So it's a win-win.
Well, when you guys set up for an in-person class, and I've been in early and I've come in after the class is done, Brenda is just like anybody else on a setup crew. Okay, there's gaff tape, there's wrapping, there's all sorts of setup and tear down, and she's involved in all of it.
Absolutely.
I mentioned that I attended my first SynodCon back in '97, and I've attended a number of the SynodCon workshops and classes since. You've had various classroom offerings over the years and taught SAC courses all over the world, but well before the pandemic, you started transitioning to online courses. I believe you got like 9 online courses now, including even a couple of Revit classes specifically geared for AV. Even your most basic course, How Sound Systems Work, has like 35 instructional videos. Now, I personally prefer the in-class experience, but what are the differences between an in-class SynodCon experience and the online SynodCon experience?
Okay, well, as we developed the courses over the year, audio is a big field. And even though it's a specialty field, and you tell people you do audio, you get the blank stare. What's audio? You mean somebody has to do that? But even the audio field itself has many facets. And we found very early on that a simple 2-day course wasn't sufficient. That's what Don and Carolyn were traveling and doing. And it went to 3 days, and it went to 5 days, and then it went to 2 courses, and then 3 courses, and then 3 courses and special workshops. And we had to expand to cover the breadth of audio. And it just became apparent in the early 2000s that we can't keep doing this because we can only travel so much. And it got to the point that, okay, we're going to travel next month. Which class are we going to do? and you would have people want you to do one class, but yet you needed to do another class. And so it became apparent that to make this viable, we were going to have to expand ourselves. And to do that, you either try to hire people and prep them and send them out, or we did it sort of the opposite. We reined it in and produced our training in a video format. And in my original vision on that, first, I didn't know how to do it. So I was starting from scratch. And my original thought was, well, just capture the live class and make it available online. Okay, so it became apparent very quickly that that really wasn't a great thing to do because of all the camera angles and the logistics. And so then I thought, well, a talking head on a video, with PowerPoints. And I got into that a little bit, and it's like, people don't want to see my lips move. I can do so much more if I narrate this thing and then annotate it with graphics and plots and, calculators and demos and stuff. And that was always the challenge in an in-person class, is how do you get everybody so they can see? Bigger screen, 2 screens, multiple cameras. And it would take forever to set that stuff up and try to make it so the guys in the back could see, or the girls in the front, or whatever the case is. And with the online training, it's like, wow, I can optimize every aspect of this and weave them into a production that you cannot duplicate with an in-person class, because I've done hundreds of them. You cannot give everybody the best seat in person, but you can online. And the other big advantage is they can hit the pause button and they can hit the repeat button, and they can keep doing it until they get it. Because believe me, it's all about repetition. And with in-person, you get one pass and that's it. And people used to describe Don's classes as trying to get a drink of water from a fire hydrant.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very apt description. But with online training, you can take small sips and keep doing it until you get all of the water coming out of the fire hydrant. So
it's funny, some of the early videos that I've done, you can find me in front of a whiteboard doing math stuff. I mean,
oh, sure.
Yeah, I've been through like everything you've just described.
Sure.
On all of that. And I would caution, and I've been through this, anyone watching your videos not to just blast through them, as you were talking about, like we do a lot of typical training videos. Because Pat, I've noticed that you use really few words, but the words you do use say a lot. So I would advise, as you mentioned, slowing down and taking the time necessary to absorb the material. Because with the videos, the outreach is greater. You don't have to be in a class, but you've also had time to refine what you're trying to say.
Yes. And the first thing I do when I make a video is I script it and I write it out. And it's just like writing a book. People say, well, why don't you write a book? Well, I've written lots of books. I write that script for that video and I agonize over that. And I try to have a very high signal to noise ratio. I say what I say the way I want to say it, because it's conveying an idea or a thought. And only after the script is completed and recorded do I go back through and then fill in the visual part. And that sort of becomes apparent as you work your way through it. Okay, how do you show what you're saying? And that's what our videos are. So we always recommend that people kind of watch the course through. All the videos that are in a course might be 12 or 15 or whatever the number is.
Much more than that.
Yeah, just make a pass through and just sit back and take it in, and then go back through again, and then go back through again. And each time you go back through, you'll get a little bit more of what I'm trying to communicate. How many videos are in a course? I should know that.
Well, How Sound Systems Work has 39, but most of them, but most of them has at least that many or around that many.
Yeah. And each one of our courses, we have 9 courses. Wouldn't you say that each course you could have a 2 or 3 day in-person class?
Oh, yeah.
To convey that information?
Yeah.
So even if we do get asked to do an in-person course, it's, well, which one? We've got 9. Mm-hmm. And you can't do them all. So the video is the only viable way forward for this. Believe me, I've thought about it ad nauseum. It's got to be video.
Yeah, and especially when somebody is learning something new for the first time, they're probably not going to get it first time through.
I never do.
You know,
Um,
Tom, there's this, you're probably familiar with this. There's a thing that you see on the internet a lot called the learning pyramid. And in this, it states that we remember 10% of what we read. We remember 20% of what we hear. We remember 30% of what we see. And we remember 50% of what we see and hear. And then if you can actually do it, of course, the statistics go up even higher. And with our online training, we can do that. You know, with his multimedia approach of how he does it, we use all of that. And so the retention level is actually quite high. There's also a thing on the internet that people often recall back to is you know, long-term memory. What does it take to restore it in your long-term memory? And most people believe that you have to learn it on day 1, repeat it on day 2, repeat it on day 3, and repeat it on day 7. And again, with online, you can do that, but it's just not possible to do that with in person.
yeah, the repetition is key, I find.
Yes, it really is.
It's the secret, really. It's the secret. Start with good information and processes and repeat them until you can do it without thinking about it. And that's audio.
Yeah, and this is so true. On your website, the methods are many, the principles are few. Methods always change, principles never do.
Yeah.
And if you have the foundational principles, you can apply those to so many aspects of what we do in audio.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, you know, when I was teaching more full time, and, you know, this is what we do, but also this is why we do it. And this is how it works. So
Well, that was what Don drilled into my head back when I was working with him in the late 80s and early 90s, is the fundamental stuff. You know, Don said, look, Pat, all this stuff's going to change, but the physics will never change. And the principle of operation will never change. And I was always prepared for the next new thing because I understood the basics of the thing that we were already doing it with. And it was just a matter of porting in, you know, the new information and just applying the same principles to the next thing. And you could learn stuff real quick because you weren't starting over all the time. Right. You were just building on a foundation that you already had.
And a lot of your online courses include educational credits for Avixa, CEDIA, as well. Some are also approved for Bixby. Some also for professional engineers, as well as NICET, continuing education credits. So there's a lot there.
All those organizations almost always accept our courses. Yeah.
I think that also speaks to the quality.
Thank you.
Of what's there. And Pat, you've also pioneered, amongst other things, the common loudspeaker format, what we know as CLF, common amplifier format, CAF. Besides those, you know, what else would you like to highlight? And CLF, or excuse me, CLF, CAF, matching maximum output voltage of a power amplifier to maximum input voltage of a loudspeaker. It's like, makes perfect sense, but I don't think that is caught on as strongly in our industry as I think it should.
Well, yeah, that's probably true. And, you know, it's not a new thing, but our industry is sort of drunk on big numbers with regard to ratings and things. And it's always been that way. You know, and back in the 1970s and 80s, you know, the amplifier ratings were ridiculous. And the FTC had to step in and say, no, you can't do it like that. Well, nothing's really changed. And we have our modern manifestations of the same thing. And what you realize is that there are these big numbers that really tell you very little about a product. But then there's this body of important information that you need to know to actually deploy a product in a predictable way. And that's what those formats are. We did not endeavor to make it the most complete format available, but it has the important stuff and the stuff that, you know, you can actually use to differentiate products from each other. Otherwise, they all start looking the same. I mean, how many 1,000-watt power amps are there in our industry? Do you really think they're all the same? And they're remarkably different, but yet they are all 1,000-watt power amps. And the formats that we have developed clearly differentiate between things and clearly give you the information you need to properly deploy stuff. So I don't apologize for those. And when we developed those, I didn't really care if anybody ever used it or not. I was just going to make sure it was right. I'm going to do this. It's going to be right. It's free to anyone. Whether anyone uses it or not is sort of secondary.
Yeah, because you're deploying stuff like everybody else is.
Yeah, and I'm not an evangelist for any of these things, but they're just tools that we need, and nobody was building them, so we built them.
We've talked about this a little bit. I'm a bit of a book hound, and you've been a contributing author in multiple industry reference texts. And I once asked Brenda, why didn't you put all of this in a book, even though you've been a contributing author and stuff like that? And her response to me that you were doing the same thing just in video form. And I'd never made that connection until she said that. And as long as we can play back the video format, the videos can be accessible seemingly forever. We've already talked about kind of what led to the online video training. And you've done 3-day classes through Infocom and Avixa prior to the pandemic, but you're only doing a couple of 2-hour classes now, or at the show in 2023. Any plans to return to in-person? I mean, you've been archiving everything in video now.
Well, honestly, the book is the text from all the classes. If I were going to write a book, I would just compile all of those. And then you've got a bunch of text. Okay, well, now I need to illustrate it. Okay, well, can you use color? Well, no, probably not. So we're to black and white illustrations, or grayscale, if you will, to a bunch of text. And what you realize very quickly is that this is not going to be nearly as good as the videos, even if you do it. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's a very flat format. And I think that, I learn by multimedia. That's the way I always had to see the picture in school. And with the online training, you have the picture. Otherwise you're just reading text and trying to figure it out. I just think that online is a better presentation of information.
Yeah, I think it gets into different learning styles too. I often prefer the book learning, oddly enough, and not everybody can do that. The video portion as well. I've got something I'm working on now. Without some of the video stuff on YouTube, life would have been a lot harder.
Yeah. And there's a place for both. I'm not saying one displaces the other, but if you have to pick between them, I would rather communicate with the videos than try to
and I heard from someone. Sorry, go ahead.
I was like, most people are visual learners.
Yeah. And I got something from a guy yesterday, he earned a certification. Hey, thanks so much for your videos. I had no idea, but yet the videos live on.
Well, I've heard Brenda comment that, when she was taking nursing training and going to college for nursing, she had to read the textbook and look at a line drawing and try to figure out how an organ worked or a process or something. And now you can sit down and watch a video animation of this stuff, and it's almost like it's not fair, because what she had to go through to learn it the original way, people now can get so much a better grasp of it in a shorter period of time with the multimedia. Would you agree?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, we watch stuff like that at night, right? And she'll look at it and say, that's just not fair, to make it that, easy, straightforward.
Yeah, well, no school like the old school. You mentioned a color printing problem, and I can tell you for a fact that printing out in black and white does not work for something like RJ45 pinouts.
Sure. Yeah, you're using hatches, to try to do your diagrams and stuff. And it's like, I'm so constrained by this,
And Brenda, we spoke a week or so ago about the affordability of SynodCon. Would you expand on that?
Yes, I will. Okay, we have 9 courses, and they cover pretty much a lot of disciplines when it comes to audio, as Pat made reference to. And if you add up all of those courses, it comes to a total of $2,250. Now, if you go to a 3-day course at Infocom, I think it's going to cost around $2,100 this year. And that does not include travel. And so it's very affordable. I mean, you can take every one of our courses and learn about every discipline that Pat teaches for $2,250, which is pretty amazing. At one time, a company would only send their top tier people to training just because it was so expensive. But now,
and it was kind of used as a reward.
It was
doing a good job. not,
Yes.
hey, let's educate you so you can do a good job.
Right. But now with online training and it's so affordable, you can really just train all of the technicians within a company for the most part.
We have a lot of companies that require all of their people to take certain courses because not everyone needs all of them. Some of them just need the first two, and some go deeper depending on what their specialty is. So you can bail out when you've got the information you need to do what you need to do. It's the way they're designed.
Yeah, which ties into something else I was going to get into. You also do classes for individual organizations and companies. So does that go beyond specific online, or how does that work?
Well, we do less of that than we used to, but those are usually specialty courses that are built around a product or an instrument or something that company is locked in on. But we even find that even with that, that it's not very efficient for me to show up and teach stuff that we already teach online. So we do sort of a hybrid. It's like, okay, you guys take the first course or the first two courses, you get voiced in the fundamentals, so we're speaking the same language. And then, okay, I'll show up and we'll do some specialty stuff on your instrument or on what you do or your gear. And it's not efficient for me to show up and talk about wavelengths and decibels where they could have that nailed down before I ever get there. And I'm sure you can appreciate that as being a teacher, that when you have a classroom, you've got people that have never heard of any of this stuff, and you've got people that know quite a bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to do something for everybody in that room. And it's very difficult. And the online solves that.
Yeah, because there's been instances where I've had a class and I've had everybody, oh, I just started 2 weeks ago, to I've got 20 or 30 years worth of experience.
Yeah.
So having those prerequisites and stuff are
Sure.
huge.
And we get a lot of IT people that take our courses. And, that's a technical field and it takes a lot of expertise, but it's not audio.
Right.
And so they need to do a couple of our basic courses to understand the world they're moving into. And they find out very quickly that IT is a very small part of audio, and it's not really audio. I keep saying that, but you're just transporting data. You haven't done audio yet. And audio is a special thing. It's its own thing.
Yeah, you did this illustration a couple of years ago. You drew a box on one side of a room and a box on the other side and connected both with a cloud, and the cloud does not fix your room.
Right.
Because
And most of the problems, are that people have are actually in the audio part, the intelligibility, the hums, the buzzes, the gain structure stuff, that has nothing to do with the internet or the cloud.
Right. And IT is so structured. I mean, they have standards and everything else, and audio, AV in general, is still the wild, wild west.
Well, we bend the rules, and they can't believe that we can do that, but that's audio. So,
I don't think many people understand this, but the annual membership to SynodCon is only $30. And I looked it up. That's less than it was in the mid 70s. And
Tom, you're froze.
Froze up, Tom. You have to backtrack just a little bit.
Speaking of technology and IT,
yes.
Apropos, I'll back up. I don't think many people understand this, but the annual fee for SynodCon is only $30, which is actually less than it was in the mid 1970s.
Yeah, it is.
And at 30, I don't think people understand what that $30 gets them. First off, access to the forum, which is fully searchable. The entire library, which is like over 900 articles. You've got newsletters stretching back to, what was it? I looked it up, volume 3, October of 1975. But the key part to this, I think, especially with the forum, is the community aspect of it with the folks that are on there. You were talking about a high signal to noise ratio in your videos earlier. And sometimes I still refer to it as the listserv because that's what it was known.
Oh, we all call it that. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the reason, there's so many open forums, but it gets to be pretty, it gets a lot of chatter. And if we can charge $30 and then you get the serious people in the forum.
Yeah, that's just a litmus test that, you're not somebody that's just making noise. And in the forum, my role there is primarily that of moderation. I post not nearly as much as others because I'll tell you, there's some incredible expertise in that group, and I learn something from them every single day. And I read all of the posts, and it's amazing the collective knowledge of that group. I'm humbled by it. So we just try to moderate it and stay out of their way and let them do what they do, because they're amazing.
And one reason why we went from $55 down to $30, because we was hoping more people would just participate, because a lot of the younger generation, they're not used to paying for membership. And so we was hoping to get that younger crowd. So that was one of the reasons why we did that. So
yeah, we want a barrier to entry, but not too big a barrier to entry.
It needs to cost something.
It needs to cost something to be legitimate. Yes.
Yeah.
If the product is free, then you're the product.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. You need to invest something in it for it to mean something to you.
Yeah.
Is what I've discovered in a lot of things. All right. So if you were audio king for a day, what's one thing you would fix, or one audio misconception that you would like to eradicate if you could?
Well, there would be a lot of things, but first and foremost, I think I would try to get people past power amp ratings and maximum SPL. There's people that judge the whole audio landscape by who produces the bigger numbers for those things. And I would,
it's like a horsepower race.
I mean, it sort of is. And when they drive things that much, then people start figuring out ways to post bigger numbers without really even changing the product. It's like, let's just test it a different way so we get a bigger number for what we've already got. And that's really sad, in an engineering driven business, for it to come down to just basically marketing. So I would try to, I believe me, I'm a big fan of marketing. I don't diss the marketing people. Don Davis always said, nothing happens until something gets sold. And that is still true today, but we have to let the marketing take a backseat to the engineering. And I think it's gotten reversed a bit here in the last few years.
Yeah, it's what Bill Whitlock refers to as marketing is the art of deception by omission.
That's good.
So good.
Yeah,
Bill's got a lot
good.
of gems like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
And the other one is I call marketing weighted data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Really
I
good.
fight it daily, believe me. Boy, the emails I've composed to try to bring light to that.
Well, when you look at a data sheet, a lot of times it's now just a list of features. And I'm like, wait a minute, specifications and features are two different things.
that specification is the weight. Might be all you get.
And the dimensions, yes.
Yeah, the shipping size of the box.
Yeah. Sometimes that's key, but still.
Yeah.
Tom,
sorry.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go
At
ahead.
one time, a well-engineered product drove the sales, and that has just changed so much. But you mentioned early in the interview that a lot of people don't know who we are, and I agree. Our marketing needs to improve. It's really, really hard to reach engineers because they are kind of past the marketing, and it's just really hard to reach them. But I will tell you that the biggest majority of the people who take our training it's either required by the company, or they take a training because it was recommended by a grad. And so, we have our grads to thank, because honestly, they are our biggest marketing force out there.
Yeah. And that word of mouth, in a lot of different areas of life, is really the best marketing you can have.
It is. Yeah.
And we're not really a growth driven company. We'll take growth. We like growth like everyone else, but it's not our objective. And we've always felt that if we do our job right, there'll be enough growth to sustain it. And that has been true.
Yeah. There's actually discussion on the listserv a few days ago about how digital multi-screen soft key devices can get in the way of operating an audio system. Do you have some suggestions for avoiding the overly complicated digital user interface rat hole?
Well, I don't know that that's going to be overcome, because that's what drives all of this stuff these days is digital and the GUI and what have you. Those things done well can work very well. But unfortunately, what happens is that great gear gets poorly deployed because maybe the field techs or the programmers aren't given enough time to really make it good. and it can be good, but maybe it's not being good because of the process. So I think if anything, we need to take these incredible products and deploy them better so that they are user-friendly and intuitive and in every way a replacement and an enhancement to the older all analog products that we've used for decades.
I had a guy, and this was just yesterday. He's like, "Oh, sound system doesn't work. We want to replace the whole thing." I'm like, "Can you give me some pictures of what you have? Give me an idea how many inputs you guys are working." And he goes back and he actually finds the rack. First time, I guess, he really discovered the audio system, and he sends me pictures. It's laid out beautifully. It's older analog gear, and he sends me an email later like, "Wow, this thing sounds great." He actually learned how to turn it on and make it happen. And like,
at all levels, some expertise is required to do audio. And it's always bothered me that Hollywood's characterization of an audio system is they make it feedback and echo. That's in a movie how you know there's an audio system involved. And it's sort of sad that that's our reputation, but it's probably well deserved.
or somebody tapping on the mic, yes.
Sure,
All of those things you
this
shouldn't
thing
do.
on.
Yeah, and when I've taught people, sometimes I've found it easier to teach them on old analog because you get an idea of the signal flow much easier.
Absolutely.
Because we've talked about principles, because those same principles apply to digital. So if you understand the signal chain in analog, that's easily applicable to digital.
All of our courses are built around the signal chain, and it's all about signal flow, inputs, outputs, processing. No matter how complex all of this stuff gets, there's still a signal flow, even through a DSP. And you have to be aware of what that is, and you have to establish the proper signal flow. It's more important now than it's ever been because we can rearrange stuff easier.
Oh, you make a mess of things.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The other part too, on the input side, there's a human. On the output side, there's a human. The humans haven't changed. They're still using the same ears.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes. It's all about, on my email footer, it says in the beginning there was information. Yes. And we have to remember that, we don't, we're in the business of information preservation. Somebody creates the information, but we have to present it and preserve it. And that's what sound systems are all about, is how do you pass information between party A and party B.
Yeah. And tangentially to all of this, our industry has historically been challenged with recruiting young new talent, and not being able to define audiovisual isn't helping us at all. What do you think is more enticing to someone interested in audio? A digital mixing console with a multi-screen software interface, or the analog console with a never-ending sea of knobs?
Well, I think it depends on the individual. There'll be people drawn by each of those things, but in both cases, hopefully very quickly they learn that there's a lot you need to know to operate one of those things properly. And hopefully the motivated ones get past the GUI and actually get into learning and thinking about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Because unfortunately, mixing is a very fashion-driven exercise too. And I see people stacking 12 plugins on a vocal mic, and I'm like, what are you doing? Turn it all off and start as basic as you can, and then make it good. And we have been reaching out. Brenda, do you want to talk about what some of the high schools are doing with
we can do that
with our courses?
So we had a high school contact us from California, and they want to actually implement our Course 50 House Sound Systems work into their high school program. And they will teach it once they go to 150, well, then they are going up to 100, but they're actually hoping to teach it to high school kids in an effort to just make people aware, get people started early thinking about audio and visual. And so, so that's what we're doing. It's actually a government funded program.
Wow.
Which is huge. So we're hoping that if things go well with this school district in California, that it will start spreading to other schools.
So there is more to just pushing the AV cart through the halls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you and I were both the sound guys at our high school, and I had no idea what I
Actually,
was.
no, I was not exactly a productive citizen during those.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we won't go there. But yeah, but I can't imagine starting over with the knowledge base that you can have now coming into audio, because we had to figure it out, didn't we? And it wasn't always easy to even find information. This was before the internet, and what these young people today can start with, if they'll do it, is pretty amazing, and they can get off to a much better start than we did.
Yeah, even knowing a few things, I still blew stuff up.
Oh, sure. Yeah, but that's how you learn. You
Yeah.
haven't learned anything until you've caused damage. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody hands you an XLR and you don't realize it's +8 when you plug it in and go, oh, that channel's not working.
Right.
Oh.
But you learn something.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
plug it into the next channel. Oh, that channel's not working now either. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah.
You only do it twice. Hopefully the brighter among us by the third time will see the pattern.
It did take let's try this. Let's say someone comes to you or another audio practitioner and they need an audio system. And rarely is it just an audio system nowadays. There's probably some sort of video going with it. What are your practical steps for ensuring the client gets exactly what they need and no more?
Okay, well, the first thing I would do is refer them to one of our grads that is qualified for their type of project, because I really don't deploy. I don't sell gear. We don't do that. But at the same time, if you're going to sculpt a system for an end user, you have to understand what they're going to use it for. You have to understand where it's going to be used, because the loudspeaker has to be selected for the acoustic environment. And, many people deploy loudspeakers because one size fits all. And boy, that nailed me royally when I was just trying to put the same box into every room and wondered why sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But if you'll let the room tell you what the loudspeaker system needs to do, once you have the box or boxes or the array or whatever it's going to be, that basically defines the rest of the system that's required to drive it. So it's all about start with the acoustics, figure out how to communicate with the people in there. That will define the boxes you need, and then that will define the signal chain required to drive that. And at the end of the day, feed it a +4 dBu signal from any mixer you want to pick. It's almost irrelevant at the design stage.
Well, and you want the engineering principles to determine your design, not the marketing principles. So just learn the basic principles, let that drive you, and let them add the cherry on top later on, but let the engineer drive your design.
Yeah, I mentioned John Murray earlier, and like him and Ray Rayburn, late John Murray, late Ray Rayburn, and others, sometimes these guys say things that like stick in your head. Mm-hmm. And John mentioned one time that, once the sound leaves the loudspeaker, it's out in the wild. Mm-hmm. And that's the room, and that's the acoustics. And the room is going to leave its imprint, regardless of what kind of loudspeaker. So deal with the room.
Yes. And to this day, I advise customers or potential clients or what have you that, when you spend money on your AV solution, don't neglect the room acoustics. Any money you spent there will be timeless, and it will be the best bang for the buck. And if you make the room excellent, then it's going to be much easier to design an AV solution.
Yeah, and making the room excellent, that's where, like any considerable project, should start with a qualified acoustician.
Absolutely.
Because if you get the room right, the sound system becomes easy.
Yeah. Yes, and acoustics is not intuitive. People should not do their own acoustic consulting. They should hire a qualified professional.
Yeah, as has been said, there's a lot more than just hanging up dead cats.
Yeah, for sure.
That's referring to absorption.
No cats were injured.
No cats were harmed in the making of this video. That's another one of the lines off the listserv.
Yeah.
And sometimes if the acoustics are bad, and I've seen this happen time and time again, you'll see like a house of worship or somebody else go through fundraising because somebody has told them this magic box is going to fix your room. Mm-hmm. When if you fix the acoustics, any sound system is going to sound much better. You don't have to, and people try and replace gear to fix a room.
Oh, I've seen people, replace the mixer because they've got an intelligibility problem. They've just wasted a bunch of time and money. It's not going to make a bit of difference.
Yeah. Okay, so as SynodCon hits its 50th anniversary, what's on the radar? In other words, what are some of the highlights we should look for?
We're not really in the mode of always having to come up with something latest, greatest. And, we're constantly refining what we already do. And I get the biggest kick out of taking something and making it, streamlining a process, making it more efficient, making it so it's more likely that someone will actually do it, because all this stuff takes time, to deploy. And an article I just did was how to adjust parametric filters and get the job done quicker and more accurately. Well, we've been doing that for decades, but let's do it better. And so we are always refining our courses, trying to find better explanations, better processes, because our goal is to shorten the student's learning curve and to make doing the right thing more efficient to do. We want it to be so that it's so straightforward that you wouldn't consider not doing it, rather than skipping steps, putting in audio gear.
Yeah, this has been many years ago, but I saw you take a measurement and then invert the curve and then apply the EQ to the inverted curve. And, you only had to run the measurement noise for a moment and you had the information you needed. The rest of it was just quiet, make adjustments, apply it, and done. I'm like, oh, that was so easy.
It's so straightforward and it takes seconds. And that gives you a starting reference point for whatever you want to do. It gives you a place to start from and a place to get back from if you make some adjustments you don't like. So, or get back to, I should say. And that's important. And we're still doing that. We just have fancier tools.
Yeah.
FIR filters and stuff we can do it with these days, but it's
because you can actually get in the valid measurement game for $1,500 or so.
Oh my gosh. My first serious analyzer was $12,000 in $1988. And I can do more now with a USB audio interface and a decent microphone than what our old multi-$1,000 analyzers could do. So there is no barrier to entry cost-wise for anybody that wants to actually do this. There's some amazing tools out there, and I've got probably all of them. So
yeah, I realized I had made the change when I actually put up my old RTA for sale.
Yeah.
It was hard to let go of it.
Yeah, once you look behind the curtain and under the hood, it's hard to go back to the really.
Well, at that point, it was just sentimental attachment.
Yeah.
To my old RTA.
Yeah.
Pat and Brenda, I really appreciate your time today, sharing the story of you and SynodCon. No matter where your understanding of audio systems is, from newbie to seasoned pro, Synergetic Audio Concepts, there's information and classes there for you. And really, you should be part of this community we know as SynodCon. Pat and Brenda, where can you guys be found?
You can find us at prosoundtraining.com.
Yeah, sometimes I still type in SynodCon, which forwards to Pro Sound Training. Yes.
Yes, that's
we do a lot of international classes, and SynodCon was very hard for with regard to translation and stuff. So Pro Sound Training says what we do, and that is also our URL.
Yeah, good. All right. So with all of your newfound knowledge of audio, don't forget to reach out to us here at Exertis Almo, the nation's largest pro AV distributor. And again, Pat and Brenda, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Take care.